Good evening and welcome to Gravitas. I'm Palki, Sharma, Upadhyay. Let's get started. Israel is firing rockets at Gaza again. Less than a month after they agreed on a ceasefire after the 11-day war, things are on the boil again. The new Prime Minister of Israel has barely settled in office, and provocations from both sides are making the situation precarious. Hamas is shooting fire balloons on the Israeli side, setting farmland on fire. Plus, the rhetoric from both sides is making matters worse. So will this escalate into another conflict? It's hard to say, frankly. The last time it started with street protests and descended into airstrikes. Today is Friday. There are fresh reports of Palestinians clashing with Israeli police during Friday prayers at the Al-Aqsa Mosque. There's no telling, really, what shape this may take. On Gravitas tonight, we'll take stock of the situation. Also on the show, Iran is voting to elect its next president. Critics say it's a no contest. The Ayatollah's favorite, hardliner Raisi, will be president. We'll tell you why the world should care. An exclusive interview with the Prime Minister of Slovenia, who says Europe did not do enough to contain the China threat and that India is key in this clash of values. The probe for the origin of the Wuhan virus must now begin from the US, China's latest salvo, as pressure mounts on Beijing. And it's hard to believe, but it happened. Pakistan is blaming India for spreading terror in Afghanistan. We'll discuss. We begin, as always, with Gravitas Global Headlines.
Global deaths due to COVID-19 have now reached the 4 million mark, according to a Reuters analysis. It took over a year for deaths to hit the 2 million mark, while the next 2 million were recorded in just 166 days. Russian President Vladimir Putin has hailed the outcome of his summit with US President Joe Biden, calling his American counterpart an astute negotiator. Speaking during a video call with graduates of a government management school, Putin noted Biden was very well prepared for the talks, forcing him to be very attentive and always on guard. In a bid to boost the country's inoculation drive, the UK has now opened up vaccination for all above the age of 18. The move comes as the country witnesses rising COVID-19 cases, leading the UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson to push reopening plans to July 19th. An oil spill was reported off the coast of the southern Indian city of Chennai after a Portuguese-flagged ship reported a fuel tank breach. The MV Devon ship was en route to Haldia in India's state of West Bengal from Sri Lanka's Colombo. The vessel continued its journey and is said to be in a stable condition. The COVID-19 state of emergency in Tokyo that began in late April will now end in the capital and 8 other regions on June 20th. Meanwhile, expressing their anger against the Olympics being held in the country amid the pandemic, people have taken to the streets and are now resorting to art as a form of resistance. At least 5 people were killed when gunfire erupted inside a maximum security prison in eastern Honduras. The incident occurred at the La Tolva prison. It was not immediately clear if all of the dead were prisoners. Australia is considering listing koalas on the country's east coast as endangered. Australia already classifies east coast koalas as vulnerable. Bushfires across New South Wales and Queensland states in 2019 and 2020 are estimated to have killed 30% of the population. Heavy rains lashed southern Mexico and caused a local river to overflow, with authorities reporting about 1,000 homes are flooded. As floodwaters slowly recede, local authorities and residents are coming together to clean up the streets. The opening day of the World Test Championship final between India and New Zealand at Southampton's Rose Bowl has been called off. Rain delayed the start of action and no toss was possible, with the morning session wiped out. Play could not get underway even after lunch, and the umpires decided to come back on Saturday after deeming the outfield unfit to play following multiple inspections. A reserve day kept in place for the inaugural final of the 5-day format has now been triggered and will be used if no result is possible on the remaining 4 days. Defending champions Brazil have maintained their perfect start to the Copa America with a 4-0 victory over Peru in Rio de Janeiro. Juventus defender Alex Sandro opened the scoring before Neymar got on the scoresheet to move within 9 goals of Pele's all-time record for the 5-time world champions. Everton Ribeiro and Rich Arlison were on the mark as Brazil virtually assured themselves of a place in the last 16.
Israel has launched fresh airstrikes on Gaza. The ceasefire is on fragile ground. The violence is flaring up. This is Israel's second airstrike in 3 days. No casualties have been reported yet, but this escalation is testing the truce they reached last month after the 11-day war. So why is Israel bombing Gaza again? Well, it started with a series of provocations. The first one was this contentious march. Earlier this week, hundreds of Israeli ultra-nationalists turned out in East Jerusalem. They provoked the Palestinians. Why? Because this march was celebrating Israel's capture of East Jerusalem in 1967. Now, the Palestinians want East Jerusalem to be the capital of a future state of Palestine, a state that they believe should include the West Bank and Gaza. The Israeli ultra-nationalists gathered right here, and some of them were heard chanting, "Death to Arabs." This was a clear provocation for Palestinians. They launched their own counter-protests. On Tuesday, Palestinians took to the streets in West Bank. The Israeli army fired stun grenades to contain them. In Gaza, the Israeli flag was set on fire alongside a photograph of the new Israeli Prime Minister, Naftali Bennett. The Hamas has now come up with its own retaliation plans. They did not respond with rockets this time. Instead, they launched incendiary balloons. They set several fields in Israel on fire. Throughout this week, these balloons kept flowing in from Gaza to Israel. And on Tuesday, fields were burning in 13 areas in Israel. On Thursday, 8 more areas were set on fire.
We in the unit of the grandsons of Nasser continuing for the second day in launching incendiary balloons. Yesterday we launched hundreds of incendiary balloons towards the Gaza border, which resulted in 26 fires, according to the recognition of the Hebrew media. Today, we will continue sending the arson balloons as long as the enemy continues its stupidities and doesn't withdraw its threats against our people in the occupied Jerusalem.
In response, Israel ordered airstrikes on Hamas. The Israeli army says it targeted military compounds and a rocket launching site. For now, it doesn't look like the situation will escalate, but the latest round of airstrikes underscores how fragile this truce is. And this is a new government that is dealing with all of this in Israel, dealing with the same old challenge. Its response to Hamas remains just as fierce. Just 3 days after he pushed Benjamin Netanyahu out of power, Naftali Bennett and his new government are facing their first test. Despite the mediation by Egypt and the United Nations, Israel and Hamas are yet to reach a deal for a lasting ceasefire agreement. Now, the Israeli military has issued a warning. They say that fighting will resume if they're provoked again. The Palestinians are not backing down. Today, during Friday prayers, Palestinian worshippers and protesters clashed with Israeli police on Jerusalem's Temple Mount. It began with a procession of several hundred people. Some of them refused to disperse. when they arrived at the exit of the compound, and that's when they started hurling rocks at the police. Israeli cops responded with sponge-tipped bullets and stun grenades. Reports say at least 3 people have been wounded in this clash. On the World Wide Web, the Palestinians are fighting fashion retailer Zara. It is facing boycott calls because one of the designers got into an argument about Israel and Palestine online. And the result is this: Zara is facing boycott calls on the internet. Let me tell you how this began. Vanessa Perelman is a head designer at Zara. She got into an argument with a model called Kahir Harhash. And this was over his advocacy for the people of Gaza. Perelman lost her cool. She sent direct messages to the model, who later shared these messages with his followers. Allow me to read out some of these messages to you. And this is what it says. Maybe if your people were educated, then they wouldn't blow up the hospitals and schools that Israel helped to pay for in Gaza. The people in my industry know the truth about Israel and Palestine, and I will never stop defending Israel, and people like you come and go in the end. Israelis don't teach children to hate nor throw stones at soldiers as your people do. These are strong words. Zara has condemned them, but they've gone viral. And they've been shared thousands of times, and this has led to boycott calls. Hashtag boycott Zara is trending on social media. Critics say Vanessa Perelman should be fired for her comments. Why is this story important? What does it tell you? The Israel-Palestine equation is extremely volatile. One comment is enough to spark a fire. Imagine how much worse a fire balloon can do. And we know Israel sees Hamas as a security threat. Israel sees Iran as an existential threat. And while Israel is on the boil, there's a churn in Iran. An election is on, and as we speak, the Islamic Republic is electing its next president. So who is running for office in Iran? Who is likely to win, and what's at stake? What does this election mean for those watching us from India? Tonight we'll discuss all of this. Let's start with a quick primer. Iran is a country of 648 million square kilometers, surrounded by Pakistan, Afghanistan, Turkmenistan, Azerbaijan, Armenia, Turkey, Iraq and Kuwait. Iran has a population of nearly 85 million. 60 million of them are eligible to vote. 90% of Iran's population practices Shia Islam. It also happens to be the country's official religion. Let's look at Iran's political system. At the apex is the supreme leader. Below him, the country's president. Iran also has an elected legislature and a judiciary. Elections in Iran are controlled by a council of guardians, both parliamentary and presidential elections. Now, this council of guardians has 12 members. 6 of its members are from the clergy, and they're chosen by the country's supreme leader, the Ayatollah. The council decides who can run for president. So who is running this time? Reports say nearly 600 people registered to be the president of Iran. 600 people. The council rejected most of them. 40 were shortlisted. 7 candidates finally got the go-ahead. 3 of them pulled out of the race, which leaves us with 4 presidential candidates. Who are these? Mohsen Raisi. He is the secretary of Iran's Expediency Discernment Council. Yes, there is such a thing. Syed Ibrahim Raisi, the Chief Justice of Iran. Amir Hussein Ghazi Zadeh Hashemi, the first Vice Speaker of the Parliament, and Abdul Nasir Hemati, former Governor of the Central Bank of Islamic Republic of Iran. All of them are close to the Supreme Leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, and one of them is a clear favorite, Ibrahim Raisi. Who is this man? He's 60 years old. He's tipped to be Iran's next Ayatollah. Right now, he's tipped to be the next president. He's currently the chief of judiciary. He was appointed to this position in 2019. In 2017, he contested the presidential election against Rouhani. He was the frontrunner. In 1988, when Ayatollah Khomeini, the previous Ayatollah, issued a fatwa and called for the death of dissidents, Raisi was made what is called the Death Commissioner. What did he do as Death Commissioner? He interrogated political prisoners, and he is said to have sentenced to death all those who failed to show loyalty to the clerical regime. How many people are we talking about? At least 30,000 people. After being appointed the judiciary chief, Raisi is said to have overseen the torture and murder of thousands of activists who were arrested during the anti-regime uprising in November 2019. Raisi is a hardliner. He owes his career to patronage of Iran's ayatollahs. In the run-up to this election, he promised a strong Iran. He pledged to focus on the country's economy. So what do the people of Iran think about all of this? Let's look at what's happening on the ground. Polling booths have been open since 7 a.m. local time, which is 2:30 GMT and 8 a.m. IST. Voting is expected to go on till midnight local time, 19:30 GMT, 1 a.m. IST. Voting can be extended for up to 2 hours if required. A state-run polling agency predicts a turnout of lower than 40%. We don't have the latest figures yet, but this was the prediction before the election. And compare this to 2017, we saw a 70% voter turnout. That shows how interested and engaged the people are with this electoral process. What about the results? They should be out by the end of Saturday, meaning Iran will get its next president in less than 24 hours from now. Currently in office is Hassan Rouhani. He's 72 and he has exhausted both his terms. What's in store for his successor? Well, not exactly a bed of flowers. The price of milk in Iran, for instance, has risen 90%. The cost of imported goods like phones and electronics has skyrocketed. The value of the rial has hit rock bottom. Today, with $1, you can buy more than 42,000 rials. Iran's economy is at its worst since the revolution. Also at the lowest point are Iran's foreign relations. This has impacted the country's oil exports. In 2016, Tehran used to export 2.8 million barrels per day. Then came the American sanctions. Energy monitoring firms say Iranian oil exports have dropped to 600,000 barrels per day. There are also protests at home and expectations from countries abroad. There's uncertainty around the 2015 nuclear deal. Iran is also currently only the second country in the world on the FATF blacklist for terror financing. North Korea is the first one. So the world will be watching how the new president finds a way to rebuild the country's economy in the face of international sanctions and scrutiny. So how much can Iran's next president really change? Well, to be fair, an Iranian president does not have a lot of power. While he still calls the shots on the country's economy and perhaps some domestic affairs, everything outside it is under the Ayatollah's jurisdiction. But we say a change of guard always marks a new beginning, so we'll have to wait and see where Iran goes from here. Next question. What will India be looking for in the next regime? I would say stable relations. India and Iran are old allies. They shared a border until 1947. 74 years on, Iran remains one of India's major trade partners. Between 2012 and 2020, India's exports to Iran grew by more than 45%. While India has suspended oil imports from Iran, the two countries continue to cooperate in several other sectors. India is developing the first phase of the Chabahar port. Recent reports say Iran also wants to rope in India for a gas project, perhaps at a later stage. When the Wuhan virus pandemic began, India delivered PPE kits and PCR machines to Iran. In June 2020, India also supplied pesticides to Iran to help it fight desert locusts. The point we're making is simple. New Delhi has a long-standing relationship with Tehran and will be hoping that this partnership only grows with the new regime. We're watching this election and we'll ask you to watch this space for updates. It took a pandemic for the world to finally wake up to the threat from China, and I've been saying this for more than a year now. Earlier today, I spoke to a very special guest, the Prime Minister of Slovenia, Janez Janša. He told me that for Europe, China has become a bigger challenger than Russia, and he admits that Europe has not done enough to contain the growing threat from China. Why? Prime Minister Janša believes Europe has put its economic interests over its values. By the way, Slovenia is also taking over the EU presidency next month. So will they try to change Europe's response to China? And how will they deal with leaders like French President Macron, who says that China is not a threat for Europe just because they don't share a border with China? I asked him these questions and more. Here's an excerpt from the exclusive interview. Prime Minister Janša, welcome to WION.
Thank you.
There's a major realignment happening in Europe with member states demanding more engagement in the Indo-Pacific. What, according to you, should be the EU strategy in this new power struggle, a new power equation?
I personally would like to speak about the competition, not the power struggle. But in reality, unfortunately, we came to this situation. It's a power struggle. And Indo-Pacific, your country especially, I think is key point in this clash of values, which is becoming global on many levels, but we can see not totally clear, but still visible division between the free countries with parliamentary democracy, with rule of law, and the countries with authoritarian regimes.
Indeed, and we recently saw a strong statement from the G7 about China. It demanded transparency from Beijing on the pandemic. It also called out the Communist Party for human rights violations and Xinjiang and Hong Kong. And some European leaders signed on the statement. But do you believe that Europe as a whole and the European Union has done enough to contain the growing threat from China?
Frankly speaking, no. As many times during the history from the last, especially 2 centuries, we saw, we are seeing understatement of the situation. We are seeing behavior where the values are second and economic interests are first. I welcome the conclusions from the G7 and also the communique from the recent NATO summit we held in Brussels, because maybe first time the freedom-loving countries are taking China seriously, are starting to take China seriously.
So then what
in all its dimensions.
Sure. What then do you make of statements like the one that came from French President Emmanuel Macron, who said that we don't share a border with China, so for us China is not a threat?
The world is global today. And China is very present in Europe. It's even strongly present in our neighborhood in Africa, in the Mediterranean basin. We don't have border with China, but what are the borders now? So it's different if China is your bordering country and you have some problems, as you well know. But China is a global power. It's much important challenger than Russia or some other countries. And I think that European Union, United States, India, Japan, Australia, and other countries have to cooperate some approaches toward China together.
The European Union has been accused of basically sitting on the fence. They want to contain China, but they also want to do business with China. As you take over the EU presidency, will this be one of your top agenda points to ensure that there is clarity of policy vis-a-vis Beijing?
Look, I'm not against doing business with China, but I'm against crossing the lines. One of the lines is we are trying to determine now, when in Europe we are speaking about the so-called strategic autonomy. We saw last year that almost everything we needed to tame the pandemic in the first wave was produced in China, not in Europe. Small amounts in India and some other parts of the world. So now Europe is building capacities.
Do you believe the US under the current leadership is as they say, America is back and is in a position to lead a global effort to make sure that we have a rules-based order?
Well, I think that America is the most important among this democratic bloc of the countries, but the situation we face is not the same as it was during the Cold War. At that time, United States were more or less strong enough to deal with this nuclear threat and other threats coming from this cold division. Currently, it's not the same.
What role do you see for India in this changing world order?
A growing role, a crucial role. I said at the beginning that even North Atlantic Alliance, so North America and Europe together, are not enough.
Thank you for joining us and for taking all the questions that came your way.
Thank you very much. I don't have a problem with the questions.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Watch the full interview tomorrow, the 19th of June, 9 p.m. IST. The voices of opposition against China are growing. Security is just one aspect of it. The other one is the origin of the pandemic. That question still hasn't been answered, remember. In recent weeks, Europe has demanded a new investigation in China. America is already conducting one. The US intelligence is investigating China. You see, the pandemic began in Wuhan, in China. It is the original epicenter. So that's where investigators will go, and that's quite obvious. But not for China. Beijing blames everyone but itself for this pandemic. Until now, Beijing has blamed the United States, France, Sweden, Italy, even India for this pandemic. And now, in order to avoid another probe at home, it is pushing new conspiracies to shift blame. Chinese scientists have been deployed to muddy the waters. They're calling the virus a bioweapon and claiming that it came from America and France. With the world now seriously considering the possibility of a lab leak, China is trying to put its own spin on existing theories to attack rivals. And you must listen to this very carefully. This is a piece from the Global Times. It begins with a graphic that is called Remapping the History of the COVID-19 Pandemic. This is what it says. The pandemic began in Spain. It reached Italy, then France, followed by Brazil and United States, and then it ended up in China. This, we say, is the mother of all spins, and it doesn't end there. The Chinese state deployed Zheng Guang, the chief epidemiologist of the Chinese Center for Disease Control and Prevention, to paint America as the epicenter of this pandemic. Zheng says the United States needs to be prioritized in the next stage of this investigation. Why? Because it was slow to test people early. And it has, quote unquote, so many biological laboratories around the world. Zheng ends his statement by saying, and I'm quoting again, all bioweapon related subjects that the country has should be subject to scrutiny. Did Zheng Guang offer any proof to back these claims? The answer is no. There is no factual basis for any of these assertions. Beijing just wants to plant an idea into the minds of people. China wants people to think the virus could have leaked from an American lab. You say it often enough, it might work. So it has deployed its top epidemiologists to make the claim, and the Chinese state media has pushed the conspiracy further. Well, here's another one. COVID-19 strains in France did not come from China. This report from Xinhua claims that the Wuhan virus was circulating in France before 2020, and these strains had no connection to the variant from Wuhan. And this piece quotes a Paris-based medical research institute to prove its assessment as authentic. We try to look if any peer review has been conducted into this study or any independent assessment of these claims have been made in this report. We could find nothing. Chinese press remains the only source of this study. And this is what information warfare looks like. China is pushing its own timelines, its own science, to shift the blame for the pandemic. The entire Chinese state machinery is engaged in this information warfare over the origins of the virus. Earlier this week, Zhao Lijian, China's wolf warrior-in-chief, floated a new theory. After blaming the US Army for the pandemic, Zhao Lijian said that Sweden had Wuhan virus cases in November 2019. Listen to this.
病毒溯源是一个复杂的
This once again proves that origin tracing is a complex scientific matter that involves multiple places in the world. It requires cooperation of scientists worldwide in order to prevent possible risks in the future and protect the life and health of people of all countries.
未来可能出现的风险。
Chinese experts are peddling falsehoods. The Chinese state media is pushing the lies, and Chinese diplomats are demanding a global investigation against the rest of the world. And this only shows how unsettled China is about the prospect of another probe. Let's turn to Afghanistan now. American troops have zipped their bags. They'll be out of the country by September, possibly sooner. The big worry is, will the Taliban stick to their end of the deal? Will there be peace, or will they return to old ways? There are some worrying signs on the ground. For the Taliban, this is not a return to the mainstream. This is a return to power. And this notion has emboldened them. Let me show you some numbers. In May 2021, 4,375 people were killed in terror attacks. That's the highest since March last year. This violent spree is the biggest threat to Afghan peace. All stakeholders agree on this. Well, all stakeholders except Pakistan. Let me give you some context now. Pakistan's Foreign Minister Sharma Qureshi sat down for an interview with the Afghan press. He was quizzed on a variety of issues, and one of them was the rising violence. This was Qureshi's answer. Who is responsible for that? Afghanistan violence. Again, if you try and create this impression that the violence is high because of the Taliban, that would be an exaggeration. Is it now? Violence and the Taliban? Well, they come as a package. But for Mr. Qureshi, it is incomprehensible. So if the Taliban is not perpetrating the violence, who is? According to Islamabad, it is India. You heard that right. Shah Mahmood Qureshi leveled two main charges against New Delhi. Number one, India has too much influence in Afghanistan. Well, how does he define too much influence? With the help of the ISI playbook, the Pakistani deep state keeps saying that India has dozens of consulates in Afghanistan, and Qureshi parroted the same line. The truth is, India runs 4 consulates in Afghanistan. Allegation number 2, Qureshi accused India of spreading. It's a bit rich coming from Pakistan, wouldn't you say? So we have 2 allegations here: covert influence and terror factories. Seems like an awful lot like Pakistan's own strategy in Afghanistan. Well, think about it. A country that's on every perceivable terror watch list is accusing India of terrorism. Even the Afghan journalist did not seem to buy it.
But at times we feel that their presence is perhaps larger than it ought to be, because they're not, they don't share a border with you.
Does it bother you that they have?
If they use your soil against us, it bothers me.
Are they?
Yes, they are.
How?
How? By carrying out terrorist activities.
Terrorist activities. How is New Delhi reacting to this? Well, we're not sure that it warrants a reaction, but within Pakistan, the comments have not gone down too well. Let me show you some of the reactions. This is from former Pak Senator Afra Siab Khattak. He says the Taliban does not need a foreign minister. They already have one in Shah Mahmood Qureshi. Here's another former senator, and I'm quoting from what he said. Is Qureshi mistakenly speaking for the Taliban, or is it public declaration of the not-so-secret state policy? Both are fair questions. By defending the Taliban publicly, Shah Mahmood Qureshi has dropped the pretense. It is no secret that the ISI supports the Taliban, but until now, at least they tried to hide it. Well, Qureshi, it seems, is tired of this hide and seek. As for India's influence in Afghanistan, the record speaks for itself. A sprawling parliament complex, multi-million-dollar dams, 200 schools, 1,000 scholarships, 65,000 student exchanges. If that is too much influence, I don't think Afghanistan will mind. Here's another question. Who made Pakistan the boss? Why does Islamabad get to decide the level of Indian influence anywhere? Afghanistan is a sovereign country with an elected government. They will decide on engagement with India. But Pakistan is still caught up, it seems, in the old days when they decided who would talk to Kabul. A bigger question is, where is this outrage coming from? A sudden need to publicly defend the Taliban and to smear India. Why are they doing this now? Well, in this internet era, we call it FOMO, fear of missing out, FOMO. The international community does not trust Pakistan to nurture Afghan peace. They would much rather see India do it. Obviously, Pakistan does not like the sound of it. They think Kabul is a satellite capital. A self-governing, prosperous Afghanistan is the last thing that Pakistan wants. So what does it do? It supports the Taliban with words and with weapons. But this is a dangerous game. The Taliban is already polishing their guns. The country is primed for a violent takeover, and Pakistan is only adding fuel to this fire. The world must not buy this hogwash. Pakistan's criticism is the best argument for putting India in charge of peace. Remember, New Delhi looks at Afghanistan and sees an old friend in need of help. Islamabad looks at Afghanistan and sees an unofficial province, a chance to create a vassal state. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has asked his country to prepare for dialogue and confrontation with the United States. The dictator has asked his countrymen to get ready to protect what he calls the dignity of the state. But is North Korea even in the state to provoke the US? Pyongyang's problems are on the rise. It is running out of food. It may be staring at a famine. What more, Kim Jong-un may be unwell. There has been speculations doing the rounds about the North Korean dictator's health after photos of a seemingly thinner Kim surfaced online. Here's a report.
The Hermit Kingdom is running out of food. In session is the plenary of North Korea's ruling party. All eyes are on North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un as he walks up to the podium. Kim wastes no time in addressing the food crisis. He calls it tense. Admissions like these are rare in a country that habitually hides behind a facade, which also makes admissions like these very scary. So, what exactly is happening in North Korea? Hunger and malnutrition have long coexisted with authoritarianism. The UN World Food Programme claims that at least 10 million North Koreans are malnourished. The country's total population is 25 million. Most families can manage only 2 meals a day. Many can afford just corn. 2020, 40% of North Korean aid. 1 year on, the crisis. China is North Korea's primary economic partner. It accounts for 90% of North Korea's trade. When Pyongyang shut that door, the bilateral trade fell by 81%. Between June and September, North Korea was also hit by a severe flood. The result of the twin disaster looks something like this. 8.5%. That's how much North Korea's GDP is estimated to have plummeted by in 2020. Unlike the rest of the world, Pyongyang failed to rebound. Earlier this year, Kim asked his countrymen to brace for an arduous march. The reference was to the famine of the mid-1990s, where almost 3 million people died of starvation. Are we talking about history repeating itself? North Korea has obviously run out of its imports from China. It has also refused international help and has advocated a stricter lockdown instead. Here's a catch-22. How does North Korea plan to reopen its border without vaccinating people at home? North Korea has not publicly signed any vaccine deals. It has been questioning vaccine efficacy, while clandestinely China. Reports say vaccines are being loaded. Are they for? Reports say North Korean civilians have not been told about a global vaccine rollout. Vaccines from the Gavi-COVAX alliance are yet to land in Pyongyang. The situation in the Hermit Kingdom is dire, to say the least. It becomes a tad bit more desperate when you consider the dictator's undisclosed health problems. Here's a photo of Kim Jong-un. Do you notice something different? We will help you. This is a photo from Kim. This is a photo of Kim from July 2020. And this is him in June 2021. Spot the difference now? Yes. His weight. Kim has clearly lost a lot of it. He is believed to be 5 foot and 7 inches tall. South Korean intelligence claims Kim weighs around 140 kilos. He's been gaining 6 to 7 kilograms a year since a BMI mismatch, and his family's health history isn't flattering. Both Kim's father and grandfather, Kim Jong-un too, disappeared for a brief while in 2020, only to return limping with a walking stick. Has triggered speculation. North Korean watchers have gone to the extent of citing the difference in the length of watch strap. Conscious one, did he intentionally, or has it been induced by a health problem? Only Kim Jong-un can answer that. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
The United States runs 5,000 military bases around the world. 5,000. Of defending against invasions and airstrikes. But turns out, nobody checks the locks. Now this may sound trivial, but the impact has been disastrous. At least 1,900 guns were stolen or lost during the last decade. And these are military guns we're talking about, licensed and owned by the American military. They were stolen from high security installations. How did this happen? As we said, no one checked the locks. The report blames unlocked doors, guards sleeping on duty, and faulty surveillance systems, basically cameras that did not work. These guns are not just disappearing, they're popping up later in crime scenes, used in shootings, robberies, gang wars. Does the US Army know what's happening here? Well, all indications are they do. The Associated Press claims the Pentagon has been downplaying stolen guns for decades. Official papers say only a few hundred guns were stolen, but internal memos put the number at almost 2,000. Why is there no accountability for this? Earlier, the Pentagon used to report stolen weapons to Congress. By the 1990s, that tradition stopped. So the data was buried. A gun could be stolen or lost, but still listed as safe on record. And I can give you examples. In 2018, New York cops were hunting 21-year-old Alvin Damon. He was carrying a Beretta M9. That's a type of a semi-automatic pistol. The cops ultimately chased him into a store and arrested him. They ran a background check on the gun. What did they find? It was used in 4 New York shootings. But here's the outrageous part. According to records, the gun was still in Fort Bragg. That's a military base almost 1,000 kilometers from New York. So how did the gun get there? Well, the Army has no idea. And here's another example. This is from the Lincoln Stoddard Army Center. In 2015, a former medical officer broke into the base. He went through a kitchen window and cut into the vault. In 4 hours, he was in and out, and inside his bag was an arsenal. 6 M4 assault rifles and 10 M11 semi-automatic handguns. Guess where some of these weapons were later recovered from? 1 M4 rifle was found with a homeless man. 2 handguns were found in a trash bag. How does the Pentagon justify this? Well, they say the stolen weapons are a small part of the stockpile. But that's not the issue here. No one is worried that America will run out of weapons. But this is about amateur lapses having real-world consequences.
Literally hundreds of millions of transactions with respect to small arms in the course of a given year. And of course, we have a very large inventory, several million of these weapons inside the inventory. So I think in the aggregate, we take this very seriously, and we think we do a very good job. That doesn't mean that there aren't losses. It doesn't mean that there aren't mistakes made. It doesn't mean that that we're perfect.
The Pentagon's reply does not really cut it. America wants us to believe that it can defend the world, but it can't even keep its own guns safe. War weapons have been trickling into the streets. And what did the Pentagon do? Downplay and cover it up. But with this new report, the tone has changed. Senators have pulled up the army. They have no option but to reform.
My understanding is that the cases of, weapons from, any branch of the services being unaccounted for and getting into the hands of civilians is likely to be a small number, but particularly given these reports, I commit to you that this is something that we will look into and certainly make sure we have situational awareness of that situation in the Army.
2,000 military guns on the street is no joke. It makes you wonder about America's tall claims. Is the US war machine as invincible as they say? How transparently do they operate? Because remember, America is a world power. They have bases around the world, like I told you. They say a cop who cannot guard his gun is not a real cop. What do they say about the US military? Man versus wild has always been a skewed rivalry. With all our tools and machines, the poor animals do not stand a chance. A sample of this rivalry played out in northern Japan. Residents there woke up to news of a bear rampage. It was 8 hours of chaos. The bear roamed the streets, invaded a military base, and terrorized the local population. What did the police do? They called a marksman to kill the animal. End of story, right? No, it isn't. Because there are bigger questions to be answered here. Our next report explains.
This is Sapporo in northern Japan, soon to be the host of the Olympic Games. Its wide roads are perfect for the marathon. Early on Friday, someone decided to test it out. A frenzy expecting guests, but of a different kind. Soon, videos popped up from around the city. The bear was crossing roads, invading military bases, and stranding flights on the runway. Some of it was innocent on-camera fun. The rest was downright terrifying. Four people got the worst of it. A guard at the military base and 3 civilians. They've got cuts and bruises, but they'll live. And what a story they have to tell. But for the bear, there was no silver lining. The cops soon sprang into action. Grounds and streets. The bear raggedly trying to escape into the woods. The cops hot on its tail. After 8 hours, the bear hunt ended. The marksman did not miss. The motionless creature was wrapped in a blue sheet and whisked away. Why wasn't a tranquilizer used? Was there no hope of restraining the animal? The police won't say. But even bigger questions loom. Just wander into cities. So how did this one reach Sapporo? Aren't coming to terrorize humans. They are desperately searching for food. Sapporo isn't an isolated incident. Such invasions are becoming common. On the same day, there was another bear rampage in Japan, in the central city of Suzuka. Thankfully, there were no serious injuries. But the clock is ticking. What would you do if a stranger invaded your home, plundered your wealth, and moved in? Lash out? That's what the bear did. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
With that, it's a wrap. We're leaving you as always with Gravitas Images. Thanks for watching. Have a good weekend.
Oh.